So the overrated, pretentious comic book legend Alan Moore is back at it again. And the way people are reacting and the amount of respect they're giving Alan Moore just made me realize how the comic book industry fell to wokeness. But before we get into it, if you like these videos and you want to help out, then maybe consider subscribing or supporting me over on Patreon. So I've talked about Alan Moore a lot on this channel, but I think I need to do it again because the guy has this status as a comic book superhero writing legend who never ever put a foot wrong and is just the greatest person in comic books. The guy is a pretentious communist scumbag, and there's tons of comic book artists and writers who should be legends and should have this status but don't, because either A, they weren't pretentious enough to write something like Watchmen, or B, they might lean one way on the political spectrum. A great example of this is Frank Miller, somebody who I believe is objectively better than Alan Moore. There is no dark Batman, Daredevil, or dark superhero comics in general without Frank Miller. But just because the guy made his smallest of political beliefs visible, people immediately lost their minds. You'll hear people saying Frank Miller would be a legend if it wasn't for his politics. But at the same time, all of Alan Moore's stories are either feminist, socialist, or anti-white. And the guy's main attire is a t-shirt with the hammer and sickle. So that's already an insane display of hypocrisy in the comic book community and industry. I could talk about much more, like the comic book legend Mike Grell, who brought in politics and real world issues in a way that wasn't bitchy and preachy, but he never ever got the credit that he does deserve. And just quickly, before I continue, I just have to make it known that I'm not some beginner to Alan Moore. I absolutely adored Watchmen as a kid, mainly just because I thought that Rorschach was a cool character, when in reality Alan Moore has stated multiple times that Rorschach wasn't actually meant to be a cool detective, but rather a parody of those type of characters, like Batman, The Question, and New War detectives. And you can whine in the comment section saying that you weren't even alive back then, but I can tell you that Watchmen didn't do anything different. It wasn't revolutionary, it wasn't like a movie, it didn't beat out any other comic. Frank Miller Daredevil, Mike Grell's John Sable Freelance, Denny O'Neil Batman, and don't even get me started on all the manga from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. All of those works were revolutionary comics or manga that brought darkness into the art form. So no, Alan Moore didn't make comics adult by making some overly long, overrated piece of shit like Watchmen. And it's not just Watchmen, I've heard horrendous things about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. He also did horrifically bad work at 2000 AD, when other people were writing space westerns and cyberpunk Dirty Harry type comics. He was making feminist propaganda pieces. I've even read the guy's issues on Spawn, which absolutely sucked. But yeah, it's a topic I could talk about for hours, because tons of people have shut off their brain and just accepted this status of comic book legend. The simple fact is, if people laughed in the face of Alan Moore and Watchmen when it came out, then there wouldn't be so much wokeness nowadays in the industry. But here's the story I got recommended on Twitter, and yeah, it is back from 2019 or something, but it's been making the rounds and some people are saying some ultra retarded stuff. And speaking of ultra retarded, this story revolves around Watchmen 2019. Now, I don't even like Watchmen, but I know that there shouldn't be race swaps in some crappy new TV show. But the showrunner of this piece of trash apparently sent self-deprecating letters to Alan Moore, calling himself one of the bastards that's currently destroying Watchmen. So already you know this showrunner guy is an absolute moron, because you can't really destroy something that was already a horrendous piece of shit. But anyway, the letter got to Alan Moore and he described it as neurotic rambling and told the guy to never bother him again. Now this is exactly what I'm talking about. People giving Alan Moore this legendary status, like he's a god that you have to send a letter to. All the guy ever did was plagiarize and write big, massive, overrated stories that were extremely boring and usually about socialism or feminism. But of course, people's takeaways from this weren't the fact that Alan Moore is a complete asshole, but in the fact that he's a legend and should still be respected. Like this guy here talks about how he finds it annoying that the public perception of Alan Moore is this grumpy old man, when it actually stems from people like this showrunner trying to push his buttons. That couldn't be further from the truth. I just think Alan Moore is a retard who read the Communist Manifesto one too many times. And you have this guy here saying he was so real for this. Now, I don't know who was real for what, and either way, it's extremely stupid. So I'm not going to go on saying what we already know. Alan Moore is a retard. All of these people are spastic communists journalists who love him for some reason. But the underlying point of this story that I just realized is that without Alan Moore and his gay socialist overrated works, we wouldn't have to put up with cucked Spider-Man and the absolute universe. We wouldn't have people like Tom King and Scott Snyder if it wasn't for this gay hippie freak. It's the same thing with movies. We would have kept on getting movies like Dirty Harry, Rambo, Predator, Commando if the public actually used their brain and didn't reject it in return for wokeness. The same goes for music. If people weren't retarded and didn't get sick of all the satanic rock and roll of the 70s and 80s, then we wouldn't have to listen to scumbags like Taylor Swift. The point is, if the fans and critics turned around and rejected Watchmen and this bearded retard back when it came out, then we wouldn't be stuck with shit like Absolute Batman. And that's never gonna change, because there's always gonna be people who will never rebel against the status quo. People who will never question authority and what they're told to believe. And what you're told to believe is that Alan Moore is a genius who should be treated like a god. But any real fan of comics and the art form who can use their brain and actually think for themselves will realize that Alan Moore is a retarded hack who needs to go screw himself. Take your Watchmen and your Communist Manifesto and stick them up your ass, and whilst you're at it, shave off the hippie retarded beard, you gay. And if you got a problem with anything I said, go complain to your boyfriend. This is it!